Oh, Ellie, you're on mute at the moment.
Oh, am I just unmuting? That's a great start, isn't it? Yeah. So it just proves, you see, you can work in the world of technical things and things still go wrong. So hello and welcome. I'm Ellie Fiorentini from BBC Radio York, where I do a multitude of jobs and things, but we shouldn't be surprised about that because, as we know, women seem to multitask and have lots of different roles in life. Welcome to what should be a lively and interesting debate. The subject is women in a time of plague, and we have some great guests. We will meet those guests in a moment, but before we start today's event, we'd like to remember Sarah Everard with a silence. Sarah was born and educated in York, and it seems fitting that we remember this young woman who started her life in our own city. And we also remember Sarah's family and friends at this time. Thank you very much, everybody. So let's meet our guests in what I think will be an interesting hour and a half, an hour or so. Councillor Rosie Baker represents the Green Party on the City of York Council. She chairs the Council's Children's Education and Communities Committee, and she also co-manages Planet Food, the real junk food. Fabia Tate is an insurance broker and is also a small business owner and a former Conservative parliamentary candidate for York Central. Welcome to Fabia as well. And Labour councillor Anna Perrett is deputy leader of the Labour group on the City of York Council and is their spokesperson on health and adult social care. Now, to get today's debate underway, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to answer one question, which will give us some idea as to how they have actually dealt with the last year. So after much discussion, we said that we would give them a maximum of 2 minutes. So I need to get the stopwatch because I am really going to be that rigid on this, I think, really. But it doesn't matter if they don't speak for a whole 2 minutes. So the question is, how has the pandemic been for you over the last year? So I'm going to start, I think, first of all, we'll start with Rosie Baker. So Rosie, how's it been for you?
Thanks, Ellie. So I wanted to start by saying, fortunately, I have had no health issues, no COVID scares personally. I've not experienced any deaths or serious health issues in my family due to COVID or otherwise over the past year. We're all safe and well, so I'm so ridiculously thankful for that. I don't work in healthcare. I don't have any close relatives that work in healthcare or indeed in education or on the front line. Personally, though, I have been a key worker on 2 days a week when working at the Real Junk Food Project York as a redistribution of surplus food, making sure that food gets out to people. I've had to reorganise several times, just as other people that work in retail or hospitality type sectors, everything about the project and how we collect and redistribute food and keep volunteers and customers safe has been a massive responsibility for me. In the first sort of 4 months of the lockdown, just being at home by myself as a single parent with my 9-year-old then, was pretty lonely, very lonely, frustrating, felt quite angry and just didn't really know. Yeah, like a lot of people, just a bit lost really. Actually felt that my son was coping a lot better than me a lot of the time. He was quite happy just being at home and having lots of mummy time. Easter, those kind of occasions were pretty awful, being by yourself. So then finally, as it came around after the 4-month point last summer, he ended up going to his dad's finally. I knew that you could swap between parents, but according to COVID safety, you could move between absent parents. But this didn't happen until 4 months into the lockdown. I was absolutely overjoyed when I said goodbye to my son and he went off to stay with his dad, but also immediately felt ridiculously guilty and swore I would never send him away again. Compelled me to get a tattoo in his honor with his name and the year of his birth on it. So I felt that's kind of torn, that I'd been desperate to have a break, but also awful at the fact that he'd finally gone. Then working from home, homeschooling, if you can call it that, has been a huge strain. It really has. I've reassessed everything I think about how much time I should spend on work and how much time my son should spend in front of a screen. I think education priorities really need to change in terms of what kind of education we deliver and expect our children to receive. Revaluing education at home, education outdoors, all sorts of things about education have been going through my mind, having gone through that experience. And yeah, my own priorities have, like I said, have had to change. And I think a change of family versus work life has definitely made me think a lot and want to be a better mum, but also need to keep professional life going as best we can, even with the work from home strains. So the last thing that's happened is that I've given up trying to get him to brush his hair. He won't brush his hair, and I'm not going to do it for him every day. So he's ended up growing little dreadlocks like me. But we'll see. We'll see whether he wants to keep them when the hairdresser's finally open. I don't know.
Rosie, thank you very much indeed. If anybody had their stopwatch on, that was more than 2 minutes, but I'll let you away with it. Rosie did say that she normally prepares 3 minutes, and I think that was 3 minutes, but that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much. I think the thing that we'll all remember from that is the tattoo that that you got in honor of your son. But obviously, lots of things there that many people can relate to. So the same question, we'll go alphabetically here. So Anna Perrett. Anna, if you could tell us, how has lockdown been for you? I will start the stopwatch, but you know, away you go.
Thanks, Ellie. It's really great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. So it's been really up and down actually for me personally. So my husband is a teacher, so while I've not been homeschooling, I have seen the other side of homeschooling, and I can really appreciate just how difficult it's been for everyone. I've struggled myself just, with the two of us working at home and trying to both be on meetings, and while he's online teaching and I'm trying to use Zoom, it's been a nightmare. So I've got a lot of sympathy for everyone who's struggled to do that, along with having to get your work done as well as getting your kids through whatever work they've had to do. So at the start of the pandemic, I was doing outreach work for a women's charity, which obviously had to come to a grinding halt because we couldn't be out and about in the public the same way we normally would be. So yeah, there was a pretty fast turnaround in my working habits, having to move everything online and try and sort of shift the way that we were supporting women to access our services to how do we do this online, when it's all been in person. And I've actually ended up now on a short-term contract with the same charity as a coronavirus support officer, which is a job title that, 2 years ago would never have crossed my mind as being possible. I think it's going to be quite interesting filling it out on the census in coming weeks. And when people open that up in 100 years and think, what on earth is that job about? It's going to be quite an interesting one, isn't it, for future generations to try and puzzle through. I have been quite lucky personally in terms of my own health and sort of my direct relations. None of us have had COVID. However, I have lost 2 grandparents and they are both excess deaths due to COVID. It's been really, really tough. And I think, I do absolutely take my hat off if I was wearing one to all the carers, because one of them was in a care home and, the carers have just been absolutely through it this past year. And one other thing that I was really, really privileged to be a part of was volunteering in one of the community hubs in the council. So I was helping out in one of the ones in my ward in Heworth at Tang Hall Community Centre, and was going out and delivering food to people, and it was real. It was difficult to know that there were so many people that were struggling, but it was great to see how the community stepped up and really sort of made a difference to people's lives. And I think one of the ones that really stayed with me was a woman who was working as a full-time carer, and she had a few kids, and we were taking food and dropping it off. And, I dropped it off on a Wednesday evening thinking, tomorrow I'll be out on my doorstep clapping for you, and you're struggling at the moment to put food on the table for your family. And I think things like that really do sort of stick with you, don't they? So yeah, I think that's definitely one of the the big experiences I'll be taking away, that we sometimes assume these things don't happen in York, but they really do, and there are a lot of women out there who really do need our support. So hopefully that's come in under 2 minutes, Ellie. I will stop talking now, or I'll just keep going.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed, Anna. And I'm sure all of us would say we're sorry to hear about your grandparents. That must have been very, very difficult indeed for you. So finally, before we start and get underway, we have some questions in already. Let's ask the same question of Fabia. So how has the pandemic and lockdown been for you, Fabia?
What I'd say, I've been absolutely incredibly lucky during the pandemic. I moved in with my boyfriend in March, and then we went into lockdown together, so we didn't have any children in the house. But my sister does have children, so I know all the struggle she's been going through with that. And also in terms of health, my family have all remained well throughout the whole of the COVID pandemic. So I do feel very, very blessed. And really for me, this year has been a huge time for change. It's given me time to reflect and kind of appreciate everything that really matters. So that's kind of my friendship, outdoors, nature, and of course, my family. And it's really made me stop taking things for granted. I think everyone realised when we were cut down to that hour of exercise, just how important outdoors became to us. But in the very beginning, I was furloughed from my job, and I ended up applying for a new job. So I've actually started a job during COVID and did all my training remotely, which was a very different experience. And I'd also moved to insurance from doing comms, so whole new world, a whole load of learning. But the company I work for has just been absolutely fantastic and so supportive to the staff. So that's been a good experience. I also got outside a lot, so I did some fundraising for York Mind, because we know that loneliness contributes massively to mental health. So I wanted to do what I could to raise money for the people who will be there to support you when you need it. So I trained and ran a marathon. I also started a campaign to grow out my body hair for COVID, which was quite a fun one to do. And then over the summer, I got very much into wild swimming, because we've got a river. I live rurally rather than in York, so we've got a river just running through the village. So I was jumping in there a lot, and then even started a little small business on the back of that, selling adult changing towels, which is exactly what you want to do during COVID and at the start of September. Sell beachwear, it's fantastic. And then I think also really started appreciating the small businesses, because my local town's Malton, and our local greengrocers and butchers were just incredible during that first lockdown, doing local deliveries. You felt a lot safer than going into some of the larger supermarkets, because they package everything for you, drop it outside. And I think you really end up appreciating that level of local business. And the other group that's been amazing for me, keeping me connected, is I'm a member of the Malton women's rugby team. And obviously we managed to go back into training in August, but just throughout the whole process we're on a WhatsApp group. So when you stop feeling connected to the community outside, my phone's buzzing every 10 minutes for someone sending a message, how's everyone going, what's happening. We set little fitness challenges, so that was just a great group to kind of keep you grounded and keep you connected. So all in all, it's been a very different and a very difficult year for a lot of people, but I've definitely had some positive experiences out of it.
Fabia, thank you very much indeed. I'm sure you'll agree we've got some really interesting panelists here today, so please do submit your questions. You'll see at the bottom of your screen a button that says Q&A. If you put your question on there, and then I will put your question to the panelists. What's been really interesting about all three of you is that health has really been at the top of all your agendas. I noticed that all of you mentioned about how lucky you've all been. Obviously, Anna sadly had a couple of family bereavements, but health has clearly been very, very important for everybody throughout this time. So let us start with our first question. And the question is, as women take on even more of the unpaid work in society, has the impact of COVID sent women back to the 1950s, turning back time on feminism? And Anna, I'll start with you first of all.
It's a big statement, that one, isn't it? But actually, I think that our rights have been so hard fought for, and you can see where things can slip quite easily. So I do think there have definitely been some positives. I think in terms of flexible working, you know, we're proving that you don't have to be present. And I would hope that presenteeism, which does hold a lot of women back and prevents you getting those promotions and things, will become, you know, a thing of the past, that we're going to have a lot more right to demand flexible working, and more employers who are willing to actually sort of allow you to take advantage of that right. But I was looking up, I did write my dissertation years ago on a gender pay gap and why equal pay legislation hadn't really helped. And I think it's going to be 2052 before the pay gap closes. So women like me who are in the mid-30s will never have equal pay during our working lives. And it's not good enough, is it? It's never been good enough. We're not closing these gaps fast enough. I think that in terms of just women, I think in terms of academics, you know, the amount of work that men were getting done, lockdown was brilliant for them. They were at home, they were having a lot more time to do the research, whereas women were at home and they were having a lot more time to do the childcare. And I think there is still this divide, you know, it's mum who the child tends to run to, isn't it? And until we all step up and expect the men in our lives to do a lot more of that, then we are still going to see some of these difficulties where women are still expected to be superwoman and to do it all and have it all and be it all, which isn't realistic. And I would hope, and I'm sure Rosie will probably feel the same way, that when we go back to having council meetings, we can have more of this sort of hybrid approach, because for people who work, it's very difficult to get to a council meeting, you know, bang on the dot at 5 or at 4:30 when you're having to book afternoons off. It's really difficult for people with childcare. If you have young children, they tend to sort of coincide with bedtimes. I think we've all demonstrated, and for women with disabilities, well, for everyone with disabilities, they've been asking for this for, you know, decades. We've been saying this technology exists, why can't we use it? Why don't employers let you and trust you to work from home? So I think there are definitely some positives if we don't let employers forget that, you know, we've all done this. You know, over the past year they expected us to work from home and we rose to the challenge. So I think now they have to sort of see it in terms of it being our right to request to work this way as well.
Rosie, will ask you the same question. You know, is there a danger? You know, women are taking on more unpaid work in society. And the impact of COVID, we've all had to live differently, haven't we? So is there a danger of sending women back to the 1950s and turning back time on feminism? Will women allow that to happen?
No, I don't think so. I think what we're seeing is just an awful lot of temporary, transitionary processes that everybody's sort of experiencing. It's a bit of dipping your toe into this kind of new life, taking it out again, trial and error, trying to work out what works best for you in your life and what doesn't work. And I think it's all about rebalancing and taking opportunities that work for you, but also saying no to things that don't work for you. So I think there's, as always, with things improving for women, and as Anna pointed out quite rightly, whether it's women with or other groups that have particular needs or vulnerabilities, it's increasing flexibility that actually makes the difference. And of course, with the huge difference from the 1950s is the fact that we have basically gone through a tech revolution and in the midst of this tech revolution, and I think it's only going to increase the flexibility and the options that are available to people. So yes, of course you can find similarities towards the fact that perhaps women are at home more, having more time, perhaps some of them perhaps enjoying more time to do more domestic things that they hadn't had time to do before. But there's that effect has happened in all areas of life as well, whether it's how we travel, what we're doing. It's slowing down. I think what I would the first thing that came into my mind when you asked this question was everybody has slowed down a bit in some senses, and I know it's not the same for everyone. And you know, people that have worked at the front line in healthcare and throughout this would definitely not say they slowed down, but an effect of changes I think is temporary. And the other thing about making sure that we carry on pushing for more opportunities for women is that they're not continually just being experiencing the lowest paid service industry jobs. And a big part of that is going to be again the revolution of green jobs and digital based jobs that create more and more opportunities to widen career options. So no, I don't. Yeah, in a nutshell, no, I don't think we're gonna get stuck back in the 1950s, but we can take some things about a slower pace of life with us if we want to.
Thank you, Rosie. Fabia, what do you think? Taking the slower pace of life, I mean, life has been a lot slower for many of us, hasn't it? We might have faced different pressures, but we might have had more time to deal with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely slower pace of life gives you more time to reflect and time to adjust to this slower life. And actually, for a lot of time, you see children who have been in a very high pace environment, actually, when they have that time at home, spending more time with their parents can have a really positive effect. I had a really different education, so I was educated at home with my 4 sisters until I was 11, and we lived like on a farm, so it was a very, very different style of life, but I absolutely loved it. I mean, part of the reason we did that was one of my sisters is incredibly dyspraxic, and she was going to have to go to an alternative school, but my mum decided actually we'll just bring it back, do it in the family, and she'll be much better with that one-on-one education. So that was part of the choice. But in terms of the question on the unpaid work, turning its back on feminism, I think really we've got to be careful with the way we use the term feminism, because a lot of women still choose to be stay-at-home mothers, and actually we shouldn't be saying that's not being a feminist, because my mum was stay-at-home mum. She brought up 5 pretty punchy women, and she writes feminist poetry, and she's definitely got my dad completely whipped into shape. So I think you can still have these characteristics and be a feminist, but definitely women picking up these unpaid carer roles needs to be addressed. And I think we can use COVID as a catalyst to have these conversations and start talking about readdressing that balance. And I think actually having the men shut down at home and seeing how much more task women are picking up is a really good way of highlighting this issue and pushing these arguments further.
Thank you, Fabia. Our next question, and we did expect, obviously, in light of events that we've seen over the last week, we did know that this was a subject that would come up. This is a question from Rose. York is certainly a city that feels safe, but we have had several extremely violent and deadly attacks on females. What does York do well, or are we just lucky? And what can we do better? And in sort of in connection with that question, because I think I'm going to read both these questions because they are connected. Well, let's deal with the first part first, actually, and talk about York. So are we lucky in the city of York? Let's start with Rosie. Are we lucky in the city, York, or can we do better?
If we can do better. I think, you know, during the times when there's the highest number of visitors to York, and although we're not known for sort of having a particularly violent city centre or you know, major incidents, there are frequently throughout, you know, the summer months especially, or whenever the city centre is open and open to all and filled up with many drunk people from all over the place, there are always complaints from residents, and people feel like the city centre is unsafe for them to go out. Not, you know, there's a degree of safety we're talking about, but even just being able to enjoy and feel that you can go out at whatever time in an evening, perhaps with your teenagers or children even, you know, it's not the best it could be. I think we do have a purple flag initiative. I'm not sure how far that's come along, but purple flag is to do with increasing community safety and well-being in city centres. So I do definitely think we should pursue more of the parts of that. I haven't looked it up recently, but I should look up what the actual investment and sort of strategies around purple flag are. But I think what we do well is that it is a welcoming city. We are fairly small and friendly bunch of locals, and a massive mix of people as well, although it doesn't immediately seem like we have a good mix of communities in terms of ethnic minorities, or there is a huge demographic mix in York, and I think that always helps to make people feel safer and more kind of a part of their environment rather than alienated. So I think I've got a bit more to say on the second part of the question when everybody else has said. Oh dear.
Sorry, Ellie, you're on mute.
Fabia, I don't know how well you know York, because obviously you said there that you've moved to Malton, but you'll be aware of the city. Do you think, are we just lucky, or is York a pretty safe city, or are there things that could be done to make women feel safer?
I mean, I know that York, in terms of crime levels, antisocial behaviour is the biggest issue. And on those Friday and Saturday nights, there is a lot of drunk behaviour that goes on. And being out in that environment is more threatening as a woman than I would assume than as a man. And actually having a greater police presence to manage that kind of situation, I think would help. One of the, I think, characteristics of York that makes it such a great city is that you still feel that there's amazing pockets of community. I think it has that kind of town community spirit, even though it's in the city. And wherever you go in York, you do really feel that community atmosphere. But in terms of making cities safer for women, for far too long, cities have been designed by men for men. And there's a lot of initiatives happening across Europe to try and make them safer for women. So firstly, really simply, things like a lot of cities were designed for road use, and actually we know that men use cars and women are far more likely to be pedestrians, pushing prams. So York's had some great initiatives, and I've done a lot by the Green Party to pedestrianise huge areas, and that has an impact on women's safety, maybe not just at night, but actually walking the streets, how they get to work, how they're moving around the city, which is really, really positive. I think other initiatives would be lighting up the city. So women as well rely far more on public transport. So actually looking at and travelling by bus, and actually looking at where these bus stops are they visibly well lit? Are women going to feel safe getting on and off them, waiting for the bus? And there's also initiatives that you can look at about advertising. So actually limiting, more anti-feminist adverts. If you've got a lot of bikini shots at the moment, if you're a woman and you're sitting at a bus stop by yourself at night and you've got this picture, a sexualized image of a woman next to you, that's not going to help you feel safe. Whereas actually if you embrace more powerful female ads, and I think it's in Spain where they've introduced renaming streets to female icons, and just trying to embrace that feminist agenda throughout the city to help kind of boost female spirits would be great to see.
Thanks, Fabia. Anna, do you feel safe in the city of York? Do you feel that, you could go in and out of the city at any time of the day and night and be okay and not be looking over your shoulder?
I don't think that many women would say that they would feel like that way anywhere that they lived. I know, obviously with what has happened this week, I have been talking to my husband. You know, we moved house in September. There are 4 routes into the city centre from my house, and 3 of them go down alleyways. And while I haven't really been going out on my own at night, I have already thought ahead that I would go the longest route, and I would take the street lights, you know, and the main street with lots of houses overlooking it. Nowhere you go, you feel safe as a woman. I think that's just a common experience. We've all gone through that sort of safety planning as we're moving through towns, cities, villages. You know, wherever we are, you are hyper aware that you're at risk of violence, and that if you become a victim of violence, you will be the one who then faces a lot of blame for it because of you going out at night. You know, it won't matter if you're walking home from work. It won't matter what you're wearing, you will be blamed for this. So I think that there's a lot of work that we do still need to do. In terms of feeling lucky about the city, there is a lot of really positive work that goes on. We've got a really strong women's sector. We've got some brilliant local organisations like IDAS who are doing support. We've got Kira Women's Project who I do work for. We've got, you know, the Women's Centre run by Changing Lives. We've got a lot of really, really strong organisations that work together to do everything they can to support women. And I think we're also lucky in that the local police force do actually recognise misogyny as a hate crime, which is something that I think every police service in the country should do, and it shouldn't just be down to luck that we live in North Yorkshire and that they do take this seriously. I think that misogyny should be recognised as a hate crime because it is systemic abuse that's directed at women because we are women. So I think there are lots of things that we can look to the, you know, the sector is doing to provide that safety for women and to give them the safe places to come forward if they experience things. But, you know, as Rosie and Fabia have both touched on, there's an awful lot more that we could be doing in the city, you know, things like buses, because, you know, quite rightly, women do use them more. They, you know, rely on it. I think urban planning does need to take into account that women move around cities in a different way to men. And we're just not seen as the sort of typical user, are we, of any sort of service. So it's not really designed with our needs in mind. I know one of the things that the Labour group was looking at in our last manifesto was family-friendly city initiatives to try and boost the early evening economy, you know, to have more people sort of feeling like they could go out with families and that it would be safe, that, you know, they wouldn't be sort of tripping over your hen and stag do's, which I know is one of the constant complaints, isn't it, in York, that you can't really have your children out after a certain time of night. But to some extent, as a woman, you don't really feel like you want to be out after a certain time of night on your own either. So there's definitely a lot more that we can be doing, and obviously some really good ideas have been shared today that I'm sure we'll all want to push for and take forward.
Thank you. Our next question is, in light of the dreadful scenes at Clapham Common last night and the fact that women know all too well what it's like to fear walking the streets alone, even years after the original Reclaim the Night marches, how can you as politicians help to tackle endemic sexism on the streets of York and everyday life? Fabia, we'll start with you because you raised a very interesting point there about, and I'm sure it's not a thing that everybody would automatically think about, you know, the adverts that you might see that are around you when you're at a bus stop or in a public place. Are there other things that can be done?
I think definitely. And I mean, I lived in London for about 7 years before moving back to Yorkshire. And I actually lived in Brixton for a year. And there was, whenever I was walking home, I did always have that niggle in the back on my safe. And I mean, when I moved there, I'd been a university rower and I'm 6'1". So as a woman, I'm like quite a formidable presence anyway, but you've always got that intimidation in the back of your mind. So I think whatever we can do to help women feel more safe, and it shouldn't take elements like Sarah's death to push us to have these conversations. We've got to keep, I mean, if there's one more female death from the streets, like there's been too many already, and we've got to keep this impetus up now because everyone is talking about it. We saw the protest last night, and all my WhatsApp groups have been pinging as well, supporting, stepping out to light your candle last night, which are really important just to show that even if you don't live in a town, you're supporting this issue of female safety. But I think there are definitely more initiatives we can do, and some of these are quite simple to implement. So in Sweden, we've talked about public transport, but actually they've created buses at night which give you choice to where you stop, so you don't have to pull up at the bus stop. You can ring the button later on and they'll, you know, drop you off as close to your door as possible. So it's just minimizing these steps in and keeping you out of the dark. I was also reading about men and the questions they're asking about how they can help women feel safer. And there are a lot of very easy things to do, such as, you know, a woman, as Anna said, you choose a route that's safe for you. So you're walking in the light area. So if you're coming across a man, actually, if they can get out of your way and cross the road, then that's keeping you safe. That's keeping you in the area. And that's a simple thing for a man to do, to actually let women have space, make sure your face is seen, really simple steps that just need to change in our culture. And there's also apps that we can introduce that women, so I think there's one called Safety Pins, so you can actually start adding information, what streets are really well lit at night, which streets make you feel safe, and then other women can pick this up and actually plan their route home on the safest walkway, rather than just relying on, you know, their personal knowledge, or if you're visiting a city you're not going to know it that well. So there are definitely initiatives we can introduce to help support women more.
Rosie.
Thank you, Ellie. So I've just had a quick look at the purple flag 100 ways to help the high street. You know, that's definitely something that I will check up as to where we're at with that accreditation for York, and how the city centre is managed by the BID, the Business Improvement District, and Make It York contribute a lot to these systems of increasing safety in York. Now, the Alive After 5 apparently is a slogan adopted in places like Newcastle and Edinburgh and Oxford, it says, and it's all about increasing the flexibility of when retail can be open. And, you know, why don't more places open at different times in the evening when people have finished work and are available to shop, to keep the city centre more alive and vibrant with more people around? So that's a really interesting idea to me, and we saw it a little bit during the lockdown, how some of the supermarkets stayed open later. You know, I think that would be something that we should encourage. In terms of what else we're doing sort of strategically and to try and figure out where the roots and causes of things, to all sorts of hate crimes or I was going to sort of, don't want to talk too much about hate crimes specifically, but in the work that the Human Rights and Equalities Board is doing, which is a partnership board around the city of different human rights stakeholders, there is going to be a bit more research delving down into why there is this undercurrent of incidents, and whether or not they end up being reported or even ever recorded as hate crimes. We've heard already on that board, which I sit on, feedback from people in minority communities, where it's not necessarily gender-based, that there is this general malaise, I think they described it as, general undercurrent continuously of discrimination, name calling, bullying on the streets. And whether or not we see it in York, people that are on the receiving end, you know, are aware of it so much more. And I really hope that a bit more research and a bit more working together with the police is going to try and come up with some recommendations. So from the Human Rights and Equalities Board, hopefully we'll see some recommendations of how to make our streets a bit more, even more welcoming than they can be.
Would that include tackling sexism as well?
Well, yes. Whether or not you're facing discrimination and feeling unsafe because you have from a gender issue, or whether it's any other protected characteristic, or anybody's safety, you know, we need to call out this. It goes on online a lot, we know, that, you know, bullying and discrimination, but it also does go on a lot more on the streets than people may be aware of.
What would you do if there was one thing that you could do tomorrow to stop it or to improve it? What would it be?
Okay, well, it wouldn't be an instant action.
But why
What
can't
I
it be
would
an
want
instant?
is,
Why can't it be an instant action?
oh, because I don't know how to translate what I would really like to see into an instant action. I wanted
That's
to talk
fair
about
enough.
education. It has to start with in schools, and we could have a huge discussion about the sexism and awful abuse that goes on within schools towards women, particularly by staff or students. It's horrific. And if young children aren't educated in an environment that has a zero tolerance policy on all forms of discrimination, particularly sexism, as we're talking about now, then that will just carry on into society. And again, it needs research and action in schools to make sure that children do not become the perpetrators.
So that sounds like actually education is the start, because if you start with people when they're young, you're educating them from a very young age, and then they grow up and they know that actually this is wrong. And then you start a huge culture change. Do you think that's the best approach, Anna?
Yeah, education was going to be where I went with this. I think it's 97% of young women say that they've been sexually harassed. You know, this is huge. You know, I mean, it's a miracle, isn't it, with those figures, that any young women haven't been. You know, this is how it starts. You know, from very young ages, you've got girls in school uniform that are having men sort of leaning out of vans, shouting obscenities at them, which was actually an example given at a event earlier on this week as part of York International Women's Week by a police sergeant who records misogyny as a hate crime. You know, that's the local example. It's all these microaggressions that we don't tackle, because how do you decide that it's serious enough to be taken sort of to the police and to be reported? And I think that we need to get a lot better at sort of rapidly reporting, at sort of knowing how to intervene. And I think bystander intervention is something that would potentially be quite good for the city, because you don't want to put yourself in any further risk of harm, because as a woman trying to intervene in that sort of situation, you do put yourself at further risk. So you need to know how to do it safely, and when it's appropriate to call for assistance with things like that. But yeah, I think education is where it has to start, so that it's going to make a difference in future. But right now, you know, we do need to know exactly who we can go to, where we can take such incidents. You know, I had one that I was kicking myself about, and I don't know why I didn't report it. A man exposed himself to me and my mum when we were walking past York Hospital, middle of the day, bright sunshine. And it was only by the time I got into the city centre with my mum that I thought, do you know what, I should have taken a photo of him. I should have called the police straight away. They might have picked him up. I don't know how many other people he did that to. And it's when you've had incidents like that happen to you and you think, oh, but should I actually be saying, oh, a man intimidated me when I walked down the street? You have to we have to be reporting all of these things. We have to be actually following it up in the justice system, because right now I think it's about 4% of women who report a rape actually get it through to conviction. You know, I think it's both sides of that, isn't it? You know, we need to believe women when they share these stories. We need to take it seriously. We need to make sure that the police are actually on our side and policing with our consent. And I think that it was absolutely awful what happened at Clapham Common. I think that some of the images that came out show that the police, they could have handled it very much differently. You know, it was a vigil. It wasn't a protest. It was handled extremely differently, and I know that they are completely different forces, the Met Police, and what happened in Scotland with men out celebrating, you know, a football team's victory. But when you look at things like that, the optics are just completely off, aren't they? When you're treating women in one way because they're going out and we're sharing this collective sort of trauma, because this is what we go through on a daily basis, and we just don't feel that the justice is necessarily there for us. So I think that, yeah, education is good. It's not a very, very quick solution, is it? You know, and we've supposed to have been having all this, you know, healthy relationships, sort of education alongside sex, and, you know, the sort of mechanics of it. It's not happening fast enough, and I think we really need to put some effort into making these things happen a lot faster.
Thank you. Even before Rosie went into the education area, a note from Rose which says a comment to be explored, which we have explored, and this would seem very encouraging. Yesterday, a 14-year-old boy on BBC Radio 4 says he wants more education in school to combat sexism. So young people are thinking about it, and isn't that great to hear? Thank you very much for your questions so far. A reminder that you can send questions into us. Just use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. A question from Debbie: rather than returning it to normal, how can we build back better, promoting well-being rather than GDP growth, making the economy fairer, greener, and more caring? I'm trying to take it in turns who goes first. So I can't remember who went first the last time, but Fabia, I'll come to you, because obviously you've had experience, haven't you, of setting up this new business of yours, and obviously you've done it during a pandemic. It's come from a hobby that you've had. So what would be your response to Debbie's question?
Well, I think one of the most positive things to come out of COVID is the respect employees now have for working from home. I know definitely the insurance company I work for, the MD was more reluctant to let account handlers work from home, but they've actually seen how impressive everyone stepped up to the challenge and how productive people can be from home. So I think actually that gives men and women more flexibility, and if you can actually work from home, it cuts out your commute time. I was actually discussing this with my sister earlier and saying, like, a lot of her friends will be dropping their children in nursery an hour before they have to get to work, and then picking them up an hour later, which over a course of a week, that's an extra 8 hours you're spending away from your child. So actually, if you can start these more flexible work environments, it does just help not only with your mental health, with people's well-being, but also your children's well-being. And I also think that would be a really positive way post-maternity leave to help get women back into the office and translate. I think the other positive we've seen from COVID is how much people enjoy being outdoors and getting active. And we've definitely seen a lot more people picking up sports. And I think really, especially rurally, we need to be investing more in these sports groups and encouraging people to take up sports, because it is a fantastic way of helping with mental health and improving well-being. So those are definitely areas I'll look at, and I think that we've really picked out from COVID that can be more flexible, lead to that lower pace of life, and improve your well-being as a worker, but also open to anyone.
How do you do that and make sure that the economy grows as well, but grows in a different way, because we're taking a very different approach? Is that possible?
I think it's definitely possible. And when you see companies like Google who are adopting a complete work from home policy to any of their staff who want to, you've got to think, yeah, this is going to make business sense as well. And I know my older sister, she works for Google and she works internationally, but over the last year she hasn't traveled at all. Everything's happening on Zoom, and it is a far better way of communicating with larger groups of people and actually building these connections nationwide or worldwide without having to put that travel in and that extra effort. And our technology is just absolutely incredible at the moment, and it's just growing and growing. So you've got that connectivity you need to grow these businesses. And the whole way I've started this changing towel business is all through Instagram and online sales. And we've managed to get different companies involved, reach out to people all online. We haven't had to have any meetings in person. So it's just a great way to actually use these tools we've had that we've developed for more social reasons like Facebook and Instagram, but actually we can definitely tap into them and use them for business. I mean, how many people talked about having a Zoom before COVID, and it's just become part of our dialect now. So I think there's definitely, we've got the technology, we just want to hijack it to completely support these industries.
I don't know about anybody else, but I had no idea what Zoom was. I thought it was a song that was played on the radio, but there we are. Rosie, rather than returning to normal, we all talk, don't we, about, oh, gosh, we want to return to normal, but normal has become very different. And for a lot of people, normal at the moment is a little bit better, apart from the lockdown, because we've all reevaluated what we have in our life. And, you know, you've all talked about it as panelists. So, you know, promoting well-being rather than the terms that we hear, you know, GDP and growth, and making the economy fairer, greener, and more caring. Is it possible? Can it happen? What do we need to do to make it happen?
Right. Well, there's this concept called donut economics, and you'll have to look up the diagram because it's a donut ring with a circle in the middle called the sweet spot. And this sweet spot would be an entire change to the way that the past assumption about growth, like you've said, and economic growth is just done away with, basically, in economic thinking. You know, when we've got the planet on the edge of climate breakdown, instead of always thinking that GDP is the measure of a successful society, the woman who coined the term donut economics is Kate Raworth, and it's this sweet spot alignment of a social justice. It's quite simple, really. A social foundation which enables everybody to have the basics that they need, aligned with the environmental resources and the finite resources that we have. So, and some people call it a just transition. I think more people might be comfortable with the word just transition than donut economics, but I think we do need to start talking about completely changing our economic view on what is and isn't valuable. And I think Fabia mentioned something again. We're talking a lot about balancing work and life, and I think enabling people to have more space in their lives to be more caring and less stressed. Things like a 4-day week, you know, and making sure we do safeguard our paid holidays, basic things like that, that, you know, our legacies of 20th century, we can't look at those things and be threatening these sort of economic employment rights that lots of people do have, but many people don't. We have to safeguard as much of our healthcare, our mental health as we can. And the other thing I was going to say about how your mental health and your well-being and your ability to care for other people and have space and capacity and time to be caring towards others is affected massively on how you live your daily lives. And the inequality gap in a society is again a massive defining statement on how a society works or is cohesive or not. And just as we talked about the gender pay gap at the beginning, the more the inequality gap widens between rich and poor, however crude you want to call it, the less and less people are compassionate. More equal societies work better for everyone. And so whether it's environmental justice and social justice, they can align better, and it depends on changes to how people make decisions. Decision making has to go through all of these processes of impact assessment on environment and social justice. So it can be done. We just need to be bold.
Anna, can we be bold? Can we, you know, not get sucked into this these words, you know, GDP, we hear it all the time, don't we? We've heard it throughout the pandemic, but can we get this balance? Can we use this time to change in a positive way and to grow our economy with a more positive and health and well-being approach?
Absolutely. I think we actually can't afford not to be bold and to be radical. Sorry, I think I've got an unstable connection, so apologies if I cut out everyone. For me, I think the idea of building back better has to centre on care, because, you know, care it's a sector that's dominated by women. We've seen the value of care in our society. Women are not paid enough for these roles. We need to have real living wages for carers. We need to have better terms and conditions for them. I think the women's budget group out a paper about how to recover from COVID, which I think it was maybe about 6 times as much money came back to the economy if you spent £1 invested in care than if you spent it on construction. We cannot afford not to be investing in these sectors, which, you know, are ones that are dominated by women. We can't afford not to be giving women this money. I think that our benefit system really disadvantages women, and you know, not seeing the £20 uplift go into legacy benefits, things that women are probably more likely to receive. So, you know, your child benefits, your carers allowance, it's state sanctioned violence, in my opinion, against women, that we are just not giving them the support that they need to take care of their families. You know, I gave that example of a carer I delivered food to. You know, I worried when we weren't giving her that food anymore. How is she feeding her family? She cannot be doing more. She's a single parent and she was working every hour she could. There's an awful lot that we get wrong, and I think we do need to be radical. We need to be looking at, you know, exactly as Rosie was saying, you know, donut economics is an idea whose time I think is now. We can't afford to be sort of living beyond our means, and we do have to start actually taking care of everyone in our society, because if you give a carer a tenner, they're going to spend it in our economy, aren't they? They're going to go to a cafe, they're going to do something that they wouldn't have been able to do. You know, you give money to people who are at the bottom end of the economic spectrum, and they'll spend it because they need the money, and because, you know, that's what we do, isn't it? And if the money is skimmed off the top by outsourcing care to private companies, you know, they have profit as a motive. Some of that money is going to go to investors, and many of those investors are based in tax haven. The economy gets no benefit, and I think that we really do need to step up and start looking at these issues, because women really lose out, sort of, you know, in terms of inequalities. They lose out in terms of economic inequalities, but also health inequalities. Life expectancy in York is slipping, and part of this is because you can't afford to look after yourself. You know, you're in inadequate housing, you can't afford the food that you need that has a nutritional value, and you skip meals so that you're feeding your children. There is an awful lot that we are getting wrong, and I would say it's not about building back better, it's about building back a society that I'm not ashamed to be part of. You know, and that's why I got into politics, to try and make this difference. And sometimes it feels like you are fighting, you know, just fighting the tide and trying to push it back. And I think we really need to step up and take a good look at ourselves and think about how we do things radically differently.
So on the back of that, Anna, this question is: women have disproportionately been hit financially by the pandemic as pensioners, working people, mothers and carers. So how can you, as a local politician, or as local politicians collectively, work to make sure that gender sensitive approaches are included in the city's economic recovery plans? And as you've been talking, Anna, it seems fitting to, you know, to put that to you.
Yeah, well, to some extent, things like benefits are very difficult for me as a local councillor to sort of say we would love to build it up and to have more money, but there are certainly things that we can do to make sure people are getting the benefits they're entitled to. I think it's maybe around 1,500 carers in York that aren't receiving any benefits at the moment. We know that there must be carers out there that not enough are actually receiving allowances. We need to be proactive. We need to be going out into the communities, meeting people where they already are and saying, look, you are entitled to this, make sure you sign up for it. That's money for nothing for the council, but raising awareness. I think there are definitely things that we can do right here and now to just make those differences. We need to be looking at having a more mixed economy, because we need more skilled jobs. We need to make sure that we are moving away from sectors which we've seen, you know, retail and tourism. When we can have the city packed, you know, it works fine, but they are not very secure jobs. There's a lot of 0-hour contracts. I was speaking to a friend recently who works in hospitality, and she found out that her 2 male colleagues were earning more money than her. They got additional money because they stayed behind and cleaned, and she told them what to clean, and she'd actually trained one of them. And yeah, they both were receiving more a little bit later. And I don't want to say it's all down to gender, but it certainly seems that way, doesn't it? And when she asked for a rise, they said, oh yeah, I'm surprised you haven't asked before, but it just hadn't come up. I think that there's an awful lot of ways that we can be proactive, and we can be going out and speaking to employers and saying, you know, follow best practice, do pay a living wage to your employees, because if your employees have a bit more money, they'll spend it in your shop, they'll spend it in other shops, they'll spend it in bars, in restaurants, they'll go out, and it will come back into the city. And I do think we need that sort of approach. And I know that Labour Party has been getting involved in community wealth building initiatives, and I think this is part of it. You know, if you give money to local people, they'll spend it locally. We need to try and keep that money in our economy, and I think things like bringing care back in-house rather than outsourcing it would make a real difference. And it's something that I've spoken about a few times in council, because you know, it's not enough for us to be going out and clapping for care workers. I think we need to be stepping up and making sure that we are employing care workers with decent terms and conditions, and making sure that there is no profit motive, because I just find it sickening, really, that to think that companies are, you know, looking at bottom lines and thinking about how they can sort of cut corners, save money on, and it's things like staff training that then suffer. And we already know that care workers, you know, they don't have clear pay and progression the way that some other professions do. And I am sorry, I feel like I've given a really long answer there, and I want to give time for everybody else to come in too.
We're going to have to shorten the answers because we have got quite a few questions to get through. So Rosie, how can you do it? You know, you're on the council, member of the Green Party. You know, how can you make sure that gender sensitive approaches are included in the city's economic recovery plan? What can you do? You're on mute, Rosie, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, cheers. So yes, no, I agree with Anna about the care jobs and in-house and not outsourcing. I really think we should have more of a care academy type thing, like we have a social work academy at the council. We could be much more innovative in celebrating and re-evaluating care jobs, having a push on getting care apprenticeships in there. I would really support all those initiatives and making sure that living wage was paid to all carers. The other thing about valuing people, whatever jobs they're doing, is keeping on pioneering the idea of a universal basic income being something that we could trial. Wales, the Welsh Foundation is commencing a trial, I think, later this year in universal basic income, which would pay all residents a guaranteed weekly safety net. It changes the benefit system entirely and makes it non-discriminatory and non-punitive and universal and fair and less complicated. And we have had a motion in council that suggested that we would look at a trial. We're calling on the government to do that and writing a letter to the government to just put behind that idea, put more support behind that idea of getting more cash into the pockets of everybody. Now, the other thing, the £20 uplift, universal credit and legacy benefits, we've also written to the government to support, to really throw our support behind that. What we're doing in terms of increasing uptake of existing benefits, like Anna said, you know, there's so many people that haven't managed to claim the benefits that they're entitled to. The council has a core contract with what's called Citizens Advice York now, for mainstreaming debt advice. We have a £100,000 financial inclusion fund which funds advice and education and training for more advice workers and benefits advice workers, a welfare benefits unit, and we have a financial inclusion steering group which brings together all the benefits advisors and community support officers and other workers in the voluntary sector to really push forward a financial inclusion agenda. And of course, you know, we support grassroots voluntary organisations as well as best we can. So it is about awareness and supporting more and more people to know what help is available to them and claim it. And we're doing an awful lot of that, and we'll continue to do so.
Fabio, what would you do to change things? Interesting that benefits have both come up twice there, and a lot of people not being able to claim the benefits. You know, a lot of women not being able to claim the benefits that they're entitled to. For some women, they might not know how to do it. So, is that a start? You know, getting out there and helping women that they can get what is rightfully theirs.
Yeah, I think absolutely. You've got to help people who don't even know that they have the ability to ask for something or do something. So it is about, you know, reaching out to the community, having the support there. When you're calling up a phone line for advice, that they've actually got someone there to give it to them and take them through the steps that they need to access this. I think in terms of building back the economy with this gender sensitive approach, especially in York. We know that way more women have been furloughed than men, or have lost their jobs because they are in these more informal roles. And some of these industries, it is the retail, it's restaurants, it's hospitalities, and these are things we hope when we can release from lockdown that there is going to be that boom, and supporting that as best we can, bringing back tourism to York as much as we can, and also encouraging people, because a lot of people have been able to save a lot over COVID, so it's actually encouraging them to go out and put that money back into the local economy. I think the care issue is huge. I actually am in the care team of insurance, and we've just seen what a battering they've had over the last year, not only from the incredible jobs they've been doing, but also obviously the pressure from taking patients with COVID back from the NHS, which has just been absolutely inspirational work that people have stepped up to, and that has to be looked at and rewarded. I think if we can encourage as well more care from home, the longer people stay in the home, the savings to the council, and that's absolutely huge. So it's not just about encouraging that, but it's also about having the infrastructure to support those kind of movements. And it's also about education. So we know that female education, whilst it's been online, has dropped because men are more likely to be given the laptops or taking over the phones. So we've got to support girls as they go back into schools, ensure that they haven't dropped back, no matter what level they're on, that they are getting that boost. And I don't know whether that has to just be a gender thing, but it's definitely something that teachers need to be more aware of, and to actually take into account, what was your student doing last year? Let's read over those reports, those reviews, and just see whether they're hitting that same level, because we don't want our children's education to drop after this.
Thanks, panelists, so far. Another question for you. Going back to the 70s again, alongside the Reclaim the Night and Streets movement, this is a question from June. Do you think the old campaign of wages for housework would be a good idea? We could pay, if as a universal basic income or another form, women or men to be at home if they want to look after their own children, instead of going out to work, and then pay someone else to do that job. So, wages for housework. Is it going to work, Rosie, in the 21st century?
Yes, I'm going to keep this short. Long before I even heard about a universal basic income, which actually was one of the reasons that I joined the Green Party in the first place, was because we were one of the first proponents of this amazing idea that Professor called Guy Standing has written books about, in terms of how do we support all people, whatever they're doing in their daily lives, in a fair and just and rights-based manner. But yeah, so before I even heard about that, and now I'm a huge backer of universal basic income, or trials at least, to see how it works. Let's at least give it a trial, like many other countries have done. As a parent, constantly, before I became a parent and worked in schools as a teaching assistant, low paid, undervalued job, I would think I would constantly having these battles. Why am I not at home? Do I want to be at home more? Do I want to have somebody else look after my kids? Do I want them to go to nursery? Would I rather do it? It's a constant burden, battle, or whatever you want to call it, in your head as a parent, as to what you do or don't think is best for your child, and what you personally want to do or not do for them. And I think if it's an emotional battle, and if it didn't have to be a financial one, then there's your answer.
Thanks, Rosie. Fabia, what do you think? Wages for housework, would it work? Can it work? Should we be out on the streets calling for it right now?
I think it's a really interesting idea to look back at some of these suggestions, and I think there probably are both men and women, or fathers and mothers, who would actually think, yeah, if I had the opportunity to be a stay-at-home dad or stay-at-home mum, I might pick that up. But then again, you also want to encourage women, if what they want to do is pursue the career, that they're supported in doing that, and that there's no negative connotations attached to it. And I know there's some of my friends are in jobs at the moment, and their job's their passion, and by the end of the month they're only going to be taking home a tiny bit because they're paying for their childcare at the moment, but actually they just love doing it and they wouldn't give it up for the world. So it's kind of getting that balance right on supporting people if they do want to take that stay-at-home role, but also encouraging people to pursue their dreams if that's what they want to do.
Anna, difficult to balance, as Rosie and Fabia have said?
Yeah, my hesitation is definitely that it would become seen as something that women should be doing. You know, we've fought really hard to have the right to go out into public, to sort of lead, lives that aren't just centered around sort of the private life within the household. And I would rather see it as something that was more UBI based, because women are really, really vulnerable to economic abuse, and there is always this expectation, and it's absolutely within everybody's right to choose. Do you want to be a stay-at-home mum? Do you want to have that choice? But it feels like there would be some women who would then be forced to go down that route, and then obviously it helps abusers keep them isolated, doesn't it? So I think that's my main hesitation. It, to some extent, I think it could reinforce stereotypes and leave some women more vulnerable to abuse if it wasn't handled correctly. I wouldn't want to see it being badged as money for housework, because then that just sort of, it seems to feed into it. I know the government did put out something with pictures of women, I think, doing housework at home, and that got a quick backlash and was pulled quite quickly. And I think that we've just got to be really careful, haven't we, that we don't sort of fall into patterns of thinking like that, and make sure that we sort of do keep pushing for women to be able to make choices as they want, and not to be sort of dragged back into that sort of, should you be leaving the house, and should you guilty because you're not doing everything at home the way that your mum or your grandma did. So I think we just need to be careful, don't we, with the language that we use around these things, especially.
We'll just go back to our discussion about benefits, because Marilyn has responded. Obviously, there is a slight delay with these coming through, so apologies, a little bit out of sync. But Marilyn says, important for better uptake of benefits, but benefits have been massively cut in recent years, so claimants remain in poverty. The cap on benefits and the two-child rule disproportionately affect women. Do the panelists agree that they need to be scrapped? In a one-word answer. Fabia, scrapped? Yes or no?
I don't think I can give a yes or no answer.
Why not?
Because it's interesting. I mean, from like a conservative point of view, we obviously would want to support women as much as possible, but we've also got to get the balance of finance right. And I think there's been so much spending over furlough that and over COVID that we're going to have to address all these issues and look at the budgets in the coming years to see what this economic impact has been. I think we've got to obviously support and benefits as much as we can, but then we've also got to balance that with building a good, strong economy.
Shouldn't politics, though, be taken out of situations like this? Because if we're trying to improve people's lives, shouldn't it be the case that everybody should be working for the greater good, no matter who you support or whatever your politics are? Or am I living in an idealistic world? I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but here we are, we're talking about how we improve women's lives. Well, shouldn't that just happen and put politics aside? Politics don't matter. It's about all living a life and getting a decent living as human beings and respecting each other as human beings.
I think that is true, and I think obviously approaching problems from a cross-party perspective is really important, but at the same time you can't I think you can't just make commitments and not have a balance. So I think that's why parties produce a manifesto that balances their arguments. Obviously I would like to, even the government to support and meet gender pay gaps would be an absolutely incredible thing to do. But if we have to do that with cuts to other areas, to the NHS or something like that, then that's just having a negative impact altogether. So I think as much as I would like to see cross-party support for female initiatives, we've also as a governing party need to balance this.
Rosie, sorry, Fabi, I didn't mean to talk across you there. Thank you very much indeed. So Rosie, these benefits, they need to be scrapped and benefit levels greatly improved so that claimants can live in dignity. But as Fabia says, cross-party approach would be great, but in the end, it does all come down to balancing the books, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I don't know. There's a moral case for saying that. Well, I think, yeah, some may disagree, but I think there's a large amount of people and politicians on various other sides that agree that the current system is not working and it is perpetuating a poverty trap. That is not acceptable, and so it needs to change. And whether it's a UBI, which possibly sort of a rollout of a UBI type system is a long way off because it is quite radical, but in the meantime, we need to do whatever we can to fix universal credit, as it were, and just eliminate any chances that people can fall into destitution and have to visit an emergency food bank with a referral, with a stigmatizing referral to an emergency food bank. That has to be a thing of the past. So yes, scrap these caps and restrictions. It is too punitive, and it is not, to borrow something that Anna said, a society that I'm proud to be part of.
So Anna, if you do that, how on earth do you do it? Because there isn't enough money in the pot.
I think we've found that there's an awful lot of money to spend on some things and not on others, and wanting to keep it cordial and not get into all the party politics around it. I think it's how you prioritize money. There's always this idea that is put out, and it's really wrong in economic terms. The country's finances are not a household budget. We do not have to balance the books. We saw after the financial crash, the Bank of England can quite literally print money for us. They didn't actually print the money. I guess it was, sort of numbers on spreadsheets, wasn't it, with quantitative easing. But the government can instruct the Bank of England to create more money that we can invest, and it is what we choose to do with that money. As I've been thinking with council reserves, I was a bit disappointed when it came to budget setting that we were unable to look at using more reserves when we were putting in Labour amendments for that, because in my view, reserves are there for a rainy day, and I would say it is pouring outside at the moment. If you're not going to spend them now, when will you? I think that, things like the 2-child cap is absolutely obscene. It really is. Forcing women to relive trauma and have to prove that they've been through things like rape is just in order to get a benefit. It's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace that you would force people to go down that route. I cannot even believe how anybody found that was an idea that could pass a quality impact assessment. It's disgusting. And let's not forget all the women who have no recourse to public funds, so they can't even be moved into a refuge. And that's not even ignoring the women who earn too much money and then aren't eligible for housing benefits. So I read a story of a teacher who was fleeing abuse, and she was forced to choose, do I leave my job so I can claim housing benefit because I can't afford to be in a refuge if I have to pay the £350 cost a week. We are failing women with the benefits system, and to be fair, we're failing everyone, I think, with the benefits system. So that's a very long way of saying scrap all the limits, isn't it? That was not a one-word answer.
That was a very polite discussion, ladies. Thank you very much indeed. Our final question, because I'm aware of the time, is from Pilar, which relates to something that we were talking about earlier about sexism and misogyny directed towards women. Do you think stronger action needs to be taken to counter misogynistic abuse and comments on social media? Now, I think, Rosie, you talked about social media earlier. If so, what sort of action? I've noticed in the last year, given the fact that we've been online a lot more, that there still seems to be, apologies because it's just moved, there still seems to be much free rein for people to hurl sexist and misogynistic comments around without much restriction. Interestingly, I saw a post yesterday from a woman who, it was a woman that I didn't know, but it really stood out for me because she'd either changed her profile picture or she'd done something on social media, and she got so much abuse about how she looked. And I was absolutely taken aback by it. So how do we stop this? How do we control social media? Our lives are lived through social media, aren't they, Rosie? So how do we stop all this? Is there anything that we can do? Put
Not
pressure
live our
on
lives
people?
through social media so much. Sorry, sorry, Ellie. Yeah, I would avoid accepting the fact that that everybody feels that they live their lives through social media. I certainly don't. I don't, and I will not. I spend most of my time trying to talk to my son about how that's not, it's one part of social life, but it is not social life. And I think I might be in a bit of a minority with trying to be less a lesser user of social media than many other people. But I wasn't brought up, as none of us were, in the world of social media, as the be all and end all, and the only thing that matters and the only way that you can make friends. And I know that it brings an awful lot to a lot of people and opens up loads of opportunities, which is wonderful. But it's not. It comes down to balance again, and above and beyond how much time you choose to spend on social media yourself, if there was some way that I could feel more confident going into the future and raising the next generation of children, that there would be more protections, and that authorities, restrictions, and the social media companies themselves were held more accountable. I am not an expert at all in any of that. I have no idea how to suggest that happens, but I really would, because I feel fearful for young people's and everybody's mental health, based on the things that can happen and the life-changing, devastating things that can happen to people because of the effects of social media. Is actually one of my biggest fears today. And yeah, it's a big one for me, actually, this. So if there's anything that can be done to highlight the dangers, again, we all say, oh, it comes down to education and things like that, but it doesn't. The book does not always get stopped with education. I do hope that there is more that can be done. I'd love somebody to take a stand and treat the crimes that go on online as crimes, and do more to give people more options of social life as well. We have to, again, go back to basics, don't we, and get outdoors more. I know it sounds silly, but there is more to life than being sat in front of a screen.
Rosie, thank you. Anna and Fabio, I'm going to have to ask you to be quite tight on this. How do we stop it? Do we do like Rosie says, and we just spend less time on social media? But unfortunately, we know that with the nature of the work that many of us do, we have to be on social media. Women have to be on social media. So do we report everything that happens on social media, Anna? If somebody does say something that's sexism and is in that area.
Yeah, I think the platforms have got an awful lot more to do to make that happen. I'm one of those people who reports an awful lot of stuff on Twitter, and but it does get picked up more, whereas Facebook, actually, the stuff that I report very, very rarely ever gets taken down. I think we need to have a broader discussion about this sort of idea of free speech at all costs, because actually when you send messages like that that are incredibly threatening, and I'm sure as sort of, you know, women who are in politics, we can probably all attest to this, you get sent some really vile abuse, and it's understanding where those lines are crossed and keeping women safe online. And if the platforms put some serious investment into doing that, it would make it a much better place, because you just can't put this genie back in the bottle, can you? Social media is here to stay, and so we need to make sure it's a safe place that we can all access and see the benefits from.
Fabia, is there anything that you'd like to add? What would be the way to deal with it? Because it is there and it's happening more and more, isn't it?
Yeah, I think definitely it's having a huge impact on both men and women and mental health, because the images people portray on social media are so far from real life. But I think just quickly going back to the misogyny you see on social media, for far too long, words about women that actually meant really positive things have just been corrupted. So like the word wench actually meant a daughter or a loved one, and that's now being thrown around. And I think one of the most important ones is, I'm not going to say it, the C word. Originally that meant something beautiful, something quaint, and it's an amazing part of the female body. So I think really we should be doing a campaign. Let's reclaim this terminology that, you know, has been corrupted over the hundreds of years to mean negative things, and make femininity something beautiful that we celebrate.
Well, thank you very much. You won't know if you're watching this at home or wherever you are that I did actually send a message to the panelists and say, can you keep this quite tight? Because I'm aware that we've overrun. I'm sorry if we haven't been able to answer your question this afternoon, but I'm sure you'll agree it's been a really interesting debate. And there's been some really interesting ideas. I've learned a lot as well, which is always a good thing. I hope you've learned something too. Marilyn has had to disappear. She said a great discussion. I have to leave now to spend some time with my grandchildren. But Marilyn raises a really interesting issue and a good question, which is, and it's not one you have to answer, and she suggests, will this recording go to the leader of the City of York Council? Because there have been some great suggestions here today, and it's something that should be shared. We do know that this recording will be going on YouTube. I don't know how long it'll take to get there, but if you just have a look for York International Women's Week, it will appear. I have a note here that says, unfortunately, Sally Duffin from the Women's Equality Party wasn't able to join us today, but they just want to tell you that they are there. And their next open meeting is on the 18th of March, which is this coming Thursday. It's a book club meeting discussing Bad Girls by Caitlin Davis. Caitlin will be joining them at 6:30 to talk about their book, and then their discussions start at 7:30. People just need to email to register. All are welcome. And this is really important. You don't need to have read the book. So if you're thinking, I haven't got enough hours in the day, you don't need to panic. You just need to email york@womensequality.org.uk. So for those of you who are mums, have a very happy Mother's Day, and thank you for giving up your time to be part of this. For those who are not mums, you know, women have still got the most amazing qualities, and just remember that. And I think it's also really important that we all support each other. And I think we've seen a lot of this during the pandemic over the last year. So long may we continue to help and support each other, whoever we are and whatever part of life we are from. I'd like to say a big thank you to Councillor Anna Perritt, also to Councillor Rosie Baker, and to Fabia Tate. Thank you very much indeed for giving up your Sunday afternoon. And I'm sure that they will join me in saying thank you to Kate Lowther, who has been transcribing all of this for us and been doing the subtitles. So thank you, Kate. Thank you also to Jamie Koo from Joseph Roundtree, who's been doing all the technical bits and pieces. So thank you very much indeed, Jamie. And a big thank you to Kate Hignett, who, when she told me she was a former lawyer, when I spoke to her this week, I kind of sat up in my chair and thought, woof, gosh. So Kate is wonderful, and Kate had organised today's event. So it's a wonderful end to what has been a fabulous, fabulous week. Thank you very much indeed. And yeah, keep safe and keep looking after each other. And thank you very much for all being involved. And thank you very much for all your questions as well. Thank you.